The Devil's Bible, a giant manuscript which has evoked fear in those who witness its power.
The Devil's Bible is one of the most striking, unusual, and memorable books in existence.
Written in the medieval Czech Republic, in times of plague, darkness, and despair, it features a huge picture of evil incarnate. But the truth behind who wrote this book and why has confounded experts for centuries.
The hole to hell, they call it, winged creatures, the smell of sulphur, noxious gases, animals were going sick, farmland was dying.
Terrible tragedy has followed this book wherever it has been.
There is a view that the Bible itself is cursed.
There is always going to be this sense that there are just some things which are too terrible to contemplate having emerged from a human soul.
Is there any truth behind the stories of its malevolent power? Hidden in Northern Europe is one of the world's most mysterious artifacts. Stockholm, Sweden. The National Library houses many chronicles from this country's history. But within its treasury room sits its most prized tome. The Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible. Elin Anderson is a specialist in ancient manuscripts and an expert on this unique book.
This is definitely one of the strangest books in our collection here. Its origins are covered in mystery. For whom was it made? Who paid for this? Why would they make such an enormous manuscript? Already in the Middle Ages, this book was known as one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Although it now resides in Sweden, this mammoth manuscript originated in a region of the Czech Republic, formerly known as Bohemia. It was plundered from Prague by the victorious Swedes in the 1600s during the 30 Years' War.
Technically, the Devil's Bible, also formerly known as the Codex Gigas, is what we consider to be the largest illuminated manuscript that we have on record. An illuminated manuscript is something that would have been worked on for decades by a series of illustrators and monks.
In terms of its size, it's 3 foot long and it weighs 175 pounds. It's got 310 sheets of vellum, which may not sound like that much to contain all those texts, but of course they're very large, so they can contain a lot of writing. And it's one of the more expensive books, and you know that because it's got pictures in it. It actually has 5 pictures and 77 beautifully illustrated capital letters.
In addition to containing a complete Bible, this book also holds medical texts, histories, and encyclopedias. But on page 290, there appears the image that gives this book its terrible nickname.
This is an image of the devil and hell that is meant to terrify. This devil is a monster. He has 2 arms and legs, but 4 fingers and 4 toes on each. He has red horns, and he has 2 red tongues coming out of either side of his mouth, indicating his duplicity and that he is the father of lies.
The image of the devil comes at a really important point in the manuscript. Everything up until that point is biblical, it's dealing with ideas of hope and salvation. Then the texts after this image seem to take a darker turn. They deal with exorcism, they deal with sins, prayers of protection, necromancy. The image itself is very unusual. The devil is shown rather humanoid. Often when you see images of the devil that come from that period, from about the 13th century, he has a tail, he looks often scaly or furry. But in the Devil's Bible, He has a very human torso. Then you have these long claws that come out from the hands and from the feet.
You can almost feel those talons coming out of the screen at you to kind of pull you in that same way the devil's always waiting around the corner to seize you. They're there. And then he's got his extraordinary, nasty little beady eyes.
There's no basis for the depiction of the devil as you see in the Devil's Bible in the actual biblical text itself. These notions of the devil as a demon with horns and a pitchfork and a forked tail is really based on legend and on medieval ideas of ghouls and goblins.
The library rarely removes the Devil's Bible from its protective glass case. But why?
Many have wondered whether or not the Devil's Bible has supernatural, magical powers, particularly because after that image of the devil, that full-page image, there are a set of spells and magical formula. And what on earth are they doing inside a Bible if not to counteract the influence and the power of Satan? The question is that given the history of the Devil's Bible and the things that it's done to people, is it actually in that glass case to protect us?
But who could have written such an extraordinary book? The answer is towards the end of this huge manuscript.
The book was written between 1204 and 1230, and most people think that one of the names in the book, Hermann Inclusus, is the name of the author. He was a monk, and inclusus means shut in, so he was some kind of recluse.
Hermann the Recluse was a Benedictine monk in the small Bohemian monastery of Podlazice.
As the story goes, he betrayed his vows and was condemned to death.
And he was sentenced to be walled up, immured for his sins. And he begged that if he could create the most beautiful book in 24 hours, that he be spared this punishment.
Around midnight, he realized that there was no way he was ever going to finish this book, and that is where the cursed aspect comes into it. Apparently, he called upon the devil himself.
And he asks the devil, complete this manuscript for me. In return, you shall have my soul. Miraculously, the next day, the manuscript is complete.
We might even suspect that that very arresting image of the devil was a kind of thank you note from Hermann the Recluse to his lord and master, Satan.
This legend is supported by some startling facts.
The book itself has been examined by experts. There is absolutely no error in the writing of the manuscript. Very often in the illuminated manuscripts, you will find blotted ink, you will find misspelled words. The handwriting in the Codex Gigas is uniform and was done by the same person, which lends a bit of credibility to the cursed legend.
Forensic handwriting experts have assessed all the pages in this manuscript and have found that it would have taken one person up to 30 years to complete.
But what's so extraordinary is the handwriting doesn't change. If you or I tried to sit down and write out all of the Bible, and we started when we were in our 20s and we finished when we were in our 50s, our handwriting would change. Why does the handwriting not change across the piece?
The reported birthplace of the Devil's Bible is Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic. This is a country where stories of the devil hide around every corner. 30 miles north of the capital, Prague, lies Huska Castle. This remote fortress dates from the same century as the Devil's Bible.
Huska Castle is a bit of an anomaly because it doesn't have many of the features you'd expect of a castle. It's not fortified, and where you would expect all of the decoration, the protection on the outside of a castle, in this case, it seems to be on the inside. So instead of keeping people out, Is it actually trying to keep something in?
The modern stone castle was built here around 1270, not long after the Devil's Bible was written. Could whatever is contained in these walls be a clue to the origin of the cursed book? Local historian Tory Burton has come to investigate the secrets this castle may hold.
The story here at Husker actually begins way back in about 870, when there was originally a wooden structure built in the forest here. Cracks started to appear underneath the wooden structure in the rock, and so they built a second castle made of stone in order to control what was coming out of the crack below it.
The builders of Husker decided to build the castle's chapel directly over this fracture in the rock.
When the stone cracked, unfortunately, evil started to spill out. Winged creatures, leathery winged chimera, sulfur gases were spewing out of here and terrorizing the surrounding area. Farmland was failing, animals were sick, animals were going missing, and it all seemed to be because of this huge fracture, which seemed to be leading directly to the gates of hell. So the second structure that was built here to serve as a plug to what we believe could be the actual gateway to hell itself, right here.
Husker Castle has always been described as a place that contains something within its walls that must not be named. And what people have always believed is that beneath the chapel floor is a smoking, hellish cavern, possibly a portal to the underworld.
The builders of this chapel left clues on the walls as to what they had witnessed.
So the chapel here was built with obviously very clear intentions, and frescoes on the walls here illustrate what might happen if, say, this hole was to open up again. We have here a centaur, a female centaur that's left-handed, pointing an arrow at a human being. Left-handedness was associated with evil, as were female centaurs. And here we have Archangel Michael weighing souls. And you can see the devil here trying to influence his decisions by sneakily pulling down the left side of his scale here.
The gate to hell is now covered. But what did the builders of this castle see down there?
Prisoners in Husker Castle were given a rather unattractive offer. On the one hand, they could be tortured or spend a long time in a cell, or they could commute their sentence by agreeing to be lowered into this pit. One man who was lowered down was heard screaming and wailing, brought back up within seconds, and his hair had turned white, his eyes were full of terror, and he'd gone completely insane.
Whether or not they witnessed hell itself down there, I'm not sure. There's a lot of suggestion that all of this is just stories, and there are perfectly reasonable scientific explanations for all of these smells and destruction that happened around the time of the hole being open. Either way, I would not want to open it up. I don't think there's any need to look down there. I wouldn't take any risks.
The Hell Gate at Husker Castle may or may not be real, but with all these reports of hellish things going on, could the devil have stalked these lands in the 13th century?
It's interesting that we have these two devil stories from 13th century Bohemia, the Devil's Bible and Husker Castle. But one needs to remember that the devil was one of the church's best illustrative stories of how not to live your life.
The devil actually would have been quite important to people in 13th century Europe, largely because this was an era when people still believed that misfortune, Any kind of bad luck, illness, disease may still have had some kind of demonic origin. So it might have been a curse or some kind of punishment for something that you'd done. So in many ways, fear of the devil was no different from the fear of God.
There does seem to be some quite esoteric and distinctive things in the architecture, the manuscript art in Bohemia in the 13th and 14th century. It does seem to have elements of black magic, perhaps, necromancy, but I think it is because of the geography of this region. It's a very wooded, forested area.
The legend of Huska being a doorway to hell did not end in the Middle Ages. In 1938, with World War II looming on the horizon, this area of what was then Czechoslovakia was annexed by the Nazis. The leader of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, was drawn to Huska Castle and its dark tales of unnatural power.
Himmler had a very big interest in the occult. He was fascinated by the power that could be harnessed from evil, and of course maybe that would help the Nazi movement. So this castle was chosen because of its connection to the gateway to hell. They used these underground spaces for torture, human experiments, which they believed would help somehow harness this power further.
Another rumour is that the Nazis used this place as an incubator facility for the Lebensborn program. This program sought to encourage the birth of children who the Nazis considered racially pure, often at the expense of the local Slavic population. Whatever the truth, all records were destroyed in the Nazis' flight from the Soviet Red Army in 1945. But just 10 miles up the road from Huska, there lies another depiction of hell.
The devil's heads are a little unlike anything else you've seen, but in some ways they look like large, frightening, malevolent, melting faces.
We've got these gigantic limestone carvings of heads. And they're 27 feet tall. And just to put that into scale perspective, it rivals the carvings of the American presidents on Mount Rushmore.
They remind me of the description of the devil in Dante's Inferno, this hairy, goat-like beast of a giant that's encased in ice with this three-faced head that eating sinners out of his multiple mouths.
Towering over the nearby villages, what is the truth behind these strange monuments?
The devil's heads were carved in the 19th century, so there's no mystery about where they came from. Perhaps the mystery is what they represent.
These nearly 30-foot heads behind me are called the Čertovi hlavy, and that means devil's heads. And as you can see, they're demonic looking, they are humongous, and they've been looking over the people in the villages ahead of them since 1846.
The man who carved these grotesque faces was the sculptor Václav Levy, who worked as a chef in a nearby town.
What we're seeing here is actually the artist's impression of his own tortured, trapped-in soul that he was waiting to get out all of those years working as a chef. And this is the beginning of his works right here. So really, these big heads are nothing more than very posh, very old graffiti.
There is no doubt that the devil has maintained a firm grip on the minds of the people of this land, just as it did in the 13th century. Written on the very first page of the Devil's Bible is a list, indicating the manuscript was created 100 miles from the Devil's Heads in a monastery known as Podlazice. Yet the very birthplace of this Bible was destroyed not long after the book was completed, furthering the legend of its curse. By the early 1400s, this region was in the midst of religious turmoil.
Bohemia was one of those parts of Europe where the Catholic Church struggled to retain control. It was a fulcrum of heresy.
You have this extraordinary figure in Bohemia, Jan Hus, who was a great reformer of the church in lots of ways. He felt it was corrupt, he felt it had lost sight of what was being written in the scriptures.
The Hussites agitated among the people to reject the Catholic Church and its teachings and its priests and its pope.
The monastery of Podlazice that gave the world the Devil's Bible was burned during these early religious wars. But fortunately, the popularity of this book would save it from a fiery demise.
The way monasteries made their money was people going on pilgrimage, walking to them. So if you had the choice between going to X monastery down the road, which had a pretty small Bible with all familiar illustrations in it, or going to the monastery where the Devil's Bible was drawn, which has this extraordinary picture of the devil in there, and it's really, really big, you know, you might be more tempted to go there.
The Grand Sedlec Monastery, seeing the value of the Devil's Bible, acquired it from Podlazice before its destruction. The Bible's new home was fantastically wealthy, but Sedlec had a macabre secret.
Medieval monasteries could grow very wealthy, and one of the main ways they did this was through burying people. If a monastery could attract local wealthy people to come and be buried in their graveyard, they would require that on that person's death they gave their goods to the monastery. Sedlec found a particularly good way of doing this in 1270 when their abbot, Abbot Henry, went to Jerusalem and brought back some sacred holy earth from Golgotha, from where Christ was crucified, and he spread this in the monastery graveyard. After that, everybody in the region wanted to be buried at Sedlec.
Death and destruction continued to follow the Devil's Bible, this time on an unprecedented scale. In the middle of the 14th century, the bubonic plague struck the kingdom and wiped out half of Europe's population.
On that event, Sedlec simply didn't have enough space for the bodies, so a decision was made to remove bodies from the existing burial ground and combine them with current ones and create an ossuary, which is where the bones would be stored.
The remains of 30,000 individuals were actually thought to have been deposited here, and you can imagine over the centuries this might have gotten a little untidy.
The monks of Sedlec decided to reorganize the bones and created one of the most spectacular yet gruesome chapels in the world.
The monks obviously had a lot of time on their hands, and they rearranged human bones from the cemetery into chandeliers, and one half-blind monk used a lot of the bones to create these kind of pyramid-like structures, and as a result of this rather morbid labor, apparently his sight was restored.
Sedlec's ossuary is quite unlike almost anywhere else on the planet. It's a cathedral of death that's been curated for 700 years. It's quite unlike anything you'll ever see.
Ossuaries are a curiosity for us today, I think. We've become very disconnected in the modern age with the dead. So go back to earlier centuries, earlier millennia, it would not be uncommon to have the remains of your ancestor, for example, a skull perhaps, displayed in your home. When you see them displayed in an ossuary, they are acting as memento mori. The concept is central to Christianity. The idea that while you are alive, be aware you will be dead and look to your soul. If you want forgiveness, if you want to be resurrected in heaven, in a wonderful state, or you want to go to hell, you make that final decision during your life.
Could it be that the image of the Prince of Darkness was included in the Devil's Bible for a similar reason? To remind people of the need to live a good life. Whatever its purpose, as the manuscript continued its cursed journey across Europe, it would capture the attention of the rich and powerful. The Devil's Bible was sent from Sedlec to the famous Prevodom monastery in the Bohemian capital of Prague. It stayed in the hands of the monks for 3 centuries, until it came to the attention of an important collector of the world's most significant religious artifacts, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II.
Some say that Rudolf II was a combination of an absolutely brilliant ruler and a bit of a madman. He suffered from what was referred to then as melancholia, or what we would refer to as clinical depression. Rudolf was an avid collector. He would isolate himself among his collection. He would stare at a piece of work for hours, lost in thought and his melancholy.
Rudolf was one of the most colourful rulers in Europe, and controversially moved the capital of the Holy Roman Empire from Vienna to Prague. But in his desire to make this city the cultural and scientific centre of Europe, he strayed into dangerous territory.
His collection consisted of telescopes, machinery, what would be considered very early computers. But he was also incredibly fascinated by the occult sciences.
He welcomed all manner of freethinkers to his court, including, which was very unusual then, rabbis. He loved Jewish mysticism. He was a magnet for alchemists, and alchemy was a very interesting discipline. It was not just about, changing base metal into gold. It was a spiritual exercise. It was about transforming the soul.
Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, is actually a really important person in European history. Because of the time he was living, his collection and the sorts of studies that were undertaken on it formed a basis for what became the scientific revolution.
Always looking for a new piece to add to his collection, Rudolf soon turned his attention to the treasures of the nearby Prevodom monastery.
Incredibly important people wanted the Devil's Bible. Why would they want it? Well, because it is extraordinary. There is no other manuscript like it. Its size, its wealth, its beauty, it's so beautifully illuminated. And then you've got the little aspect that maybe owning this thing, having it in your collection, could act as a protection against the devil.
Rudolf was determined to get his hands on the Devil's Bible, and given the fact that that monastery in Bohemia was conveniently within the Holy Roman Empire, he basically bullied the monks into handing it over.
Prevodom monastery loaned the Devil's Bible to the emperor, but soon his empire would begin to crumble. The latter part of Rudolf's reign was racked with revolt and war with the Ottoman Empire. He became a paranoid recluse, and his titles were slowly stripped away by his brother, Matthias.
Rudolf blamed his downfall on many, many people. But one thing he did was to blame the people of Prague. He said to the people of Prague, "I brought you this glory, and this is how you treat me." And many, many people say that the curse against Prague upon Rudolf's deathbed is what led to the 300 years of conflict following his death, including the 30 Years' War.
The 30 Years' War saw bloody warfare between most of the great powers of Europe, with up to 8 million casualties. In 1648, troops of the Swedish Empire, led by Queen Christina, besieged Prague, and they went straight for Rudolf's treasured collection.
The Swedes looted Prague where this Bible was kept. And they sought out libraries and colleges, private collections to find books to bring back to Sweden. It was a very planned attack. They knew exactly what they were looking for.
Rudolph II and Queen Christina were essentially very modern monarchs. They were openly bisexual, they were open to all kinds of ideas, they were extremely tolerant and learned, and they both wanted to get their hands on the Devil's Bible. Why? Maybe because it challenged the consensus, maybe because it was a bit dangerous.
The Devil's Bible was one of the many objects sacked by Queen Christina's army during the 30 Years' War. And the weight of the Bible was so great that legend states that it took 2 of Queen Christina's soldiers to carry it back to Stockholm.
But as it traveled north, many people who encountered the Devil's Bible would experience a similar fate to those who had suffered before. After the victorious Queen Christina took the Bible from Prague in 1648, it was kept in the Royal Library at the Tre Krona Castle in Stockholm.
Queen Christina was an incredibly well-educated woman who had a habit of looting other people's libraries during military campaigns. And she was so clever, so wise, that she was known as the Minerva of the North, after the Roman goddess of wisdom.
She was what you might call a woman of power. She was almost certainly gay. She dressed in drag. She dressed as a man from an early age. She was educated, and she had a mania for collecting books.
But in 1654, after 22 years on the throne, Christina made a momentous decision.
She was for a long time a controversial figure in Sweden because she converted to Catholicism, as Sweden was a strictly Protestant country for hundreds of years.
Renouncing the throne of the staunchly Protestant nation, Christina left Sweden to live the rest of her days in Rome as the guest of the Pope. Before she left, she took many of her beloved books, but not the Devil's Bible.
You might wonder why Queen Christina decided not to take the Devil's Bible with her, the very centre of Christianity. But maybe that's the point, that the Pope, that the Catholic Church didn't want what was essentially a satanic authored Bible in the Vatican.
The Devil's Bible remained in Stockholm, but the violent history of this book had followed it from Bohemia to Sweden.
The Devil's Bible was kept at the Royal Library in the Royal Castle of Stockholm. And in 1697, there was a huge fire breaking out, destroying the whole building. And this affected the Royal Library and the Royal Archives as well.
And in that library, there were around 24,500 books and 14,000 manuscripts, and only a quarter of them survived.
The Tre Krona Castle was destroyed and then replaced with the Baroque Stockholm Palace. The Devil's Bible itself was saved, but not without cost.
The story goes that staff threw it out of the window.
And unfortunately, maybe because the book is cursed, it lands on somebody's head outside, seriously injuring them.
The Devil's Bible still bears the scars of the blaze, seen possibly by the darkened patches of vellum. It's at this time that a number of pages are said to have been mysteriously removed. What could have happened to them?
Once the Bible had been recovered, it was discovered that several of the pages were missing, and it's believed that one of those pages had a prayer to Satan inscribed on it by the author, Herman the Recluse. And that monk may have written that prayer as part of his deal, his pact with the evil one.
There was a great trade in medieval manuscripts, just as there was a great trade in relics. for the same reason, that they drew people, so they had a value. I think the missing pages and manuscripts would also have a value in terms of their beauty.
The Devil's Bible has some pages missing, and so this has obviously led to speculation as to what they may have been. In fact, we know from an early description of the Bible that it once had a copy of the Rule of St. Benedict in it, which it no longer does. Now, the Rule of St. Benedict, of course, in Catholic pre-Reformation Europe was just the rule by which most monks and nuns lived. It was pretty inoffensive. But after the Reformation, it was a sign of Catholic living, which was not very welcome. So in all likelihood, post-Reformation, Protestants removed the Rule of St. Benedict.
After its incredible escape from the flames, the Bible travelled between various places in Stockholm until it came to rest where it is today, in the National Library. But stories of demonic possession continued into the modern era.
In the 1850s, there was a story published about a caretaker at the library who fell asleep at work, and when he woke up at midnight, he saw the Devil's Bible whirling around in the air, leading a crazy dance of books around it. He lost his mind and never came back to his senses.
Since the Devil's Bible was encased in glass in the Treasury Room, there have been no other reported incidents. What became of this book's author is unknown. However, legend of his making a deal with the devil is not without precedent. Over the centuries, many have felt it necessary to call to the bowels of hell for assistance.
The idea of making a pact, a deal with the devil, is ancient. The concept that there is good and evil, demons and angels, and that aligning yourself with one or other will empower you during your life is a tantalizing prospect for anyone.
It's fascinating that there have always been stories of people selling their souls to the devil. And this goes back right to the very earliest days of the church. We see it throughout the medieval period. Even a pope like Pope Sylvester II was said to have entered a deal with the devil in order to be able to take the papal throne. Through the medieval period, the witch trials, of course, they were all claimed to be in league with the devil, right the way through to modern times.
All the legends of pacts with the devil raise a pertinent question. Are these merely stories, or could they be real?
I think what these stories do is they act almost like social parables. They're ways of suggesting that the pursuit of something good in life can sometimes become so all-consuming that it ends up becoming destructive.
We may never know the truth of what happened between Herman the Recluse and the devil in the 13th century. But in the 21st century, the product of this diabolical pact would return to its homeland. In 2007, the journey of the Devil's Bible would come full circle when it was loaned to the Czech government and displayed in the National Library in Prague. The exhibition attracted thousands of people.
Czech history lovers have been waiting and anticipating the return of the Devil's Bible literally for centuries, but visitors were only allowed to look at it for a maximum of 10 minutes.
I think we're still so interested in this book because somewhere deep down in the human condition, there is always going to be this sense that there are just some things which are too terrible to contemplate having emerged from a human soul and from a human mind. It's a way of personifying our worst fears.
But over 800 years after it was written in mysterious circumstances, what is the truth behind the stories of this book's demonic curse?
The human mind is incredibly fertile and loves imagining stories around unusual things. The Devil's Bible is genuinely very unusual, so it should come as no surprise that there are a whole raft of stories and legends that surround it. And that may even be why it was created in the first place. One can well imagine that the illustrator who sat there with the Bible with a blank page on his scriptorium desk thought a full-size devil will really get people talking. And it has.
The idea that the Devil's Bible is cursed connects to certain events that have taken place around it. But really, that it survives at all is quite a miracle. Most manuscripts from the medieval period have been lost, reused, turned into scrap. That it has survived is extraordinary. That things will have happened around it is inevitable.
Some people throughout history have claimed that this book is cursed. It's not strange when you think about this image of the devil that sets the imagination running. But I think this book has been extremely blessed because we still have it after 800 years. Today, we keep the Devil's Bible in a secure case, not because it's cursed, but because we have to monitor the environment and keep it safe.
Could the purpose of the Devil's Bible be similar to the ossuary at its previous home in Sedlec? Might this image of the devil be some sort of memento mori to serve as a warning to 13th century Bohemia?
Bohemia would have had traditions, folklores, legends that go back into pre-Christian times connected with the natural world. Things like the ossuary, the gates to hell, the Devil's Bible. We're actually seeing a Christianity that is adapting earlier, older pagan ideas and formulating them in their own specific way.
If you live in a society that's racked by war, armies charging through your land, plagues, racking things, your children all dying early, you have a much more apocalyptic view of life, really. And I think that in the medieval mind, the world split very easily between good and bad.
You could imagine that poor people in the Middle Ages led such desperate, appalling lives that many of them actually worshipped both God and the devil. You know, they were hedging their bets in the hope that one or the other would help them out. And this was condemned by the church as blasphemy and punishable by death, but it didn't stop people doing it.
You see, people point to the picture of the devil and say that just shows you it is a demonic book. But on the very opposite page is a depiction of the city of God, of heaven.
Heaven on the left and the devil, hell on the right. It's the core duality at the heart of Christianity. It's salvation and it's perdition.
It's just served right up for the reader. What's it going to be? You can either lead the good life and go to heaven, or look what waits for you in hell.
So, is that all this book is? A grandiose attempt to scare medieval Christians into doing the right thing?
I think the Devil's Bible is extraordinary. I don't go in necessarily for this idea of a legend associated with the devil. I think there's a very obvious reason why that image occurs where it does. But I do think there is something extraordinary about the fact this thing got made at all. It would have taken so much scholarship, so much dedication, so much patience to create it. It is an extraordinary achievement.
Debate will continue over the origins of the Devil's Bible, written 8 centuries ago in Bohemia. It seems this mighty book will fascinate us for many more centuries to come.